cherish our entrepreneurs and those that make investments in our state. And that's what we will continue to do. And let me just briefly go through some of these. We're going to add an additional $500 million for grants, not loans, for small businesses. The conformity, which is a fancy word for tax conformity, conforming with the federal tax code around those PPP loans. And remember those paycheck protection loans, and you can get a tax write-off. It's complicated. And we're doing another $450 million because there's 2 months that wasn't covered in the last conformity package, which was $6.2 billion. Again, if you're listening to me, you have to be confused. But all those numbers are accurate. The diesel tax, which I referenced, which again, I focused as a small business relief because I really believe it to be disproportionately so. And then I want to thank Karen and our team to really focus on the issue of businesses notably impacted because of water and drought and scarcity. A lot of ag businesses, and it's not just talking about small farmers themselves, though we do record amount of investments in that space, but how about the person that warehouses some of the fruit and vegetables? And because the land was fallow, doesn't have the ability to warehouse, and his business has been impacted. And that's why you're seeing this $75 million increase in terms of supporting those ancillary businesses, as well as small ag businesses that are directly being impacted by the drought. I'll remind everybody of what we did together. This is big. Thank you to the Speaker, Speaker Rendon, and obviously Pro Tem Atkins. They made this happen. And I compliment and congratulate and thank them on behalf of everybody that was advantaged and benefited. Part of this was our paid sick leave, and now also moving $7.2 billion in tax relief and R&D tax credits. NOL is a fancy way, or just, it's not even fancy, it's just net operating loss. That's for your accountant to explain to you, but important. For a lot of businesses in the state, so reestablishing that, and it looks like we had a $5.5 million estimate in January. It looks to actually be even more generous contribution, 7.2. And then you see conformity, that's again, that conformity of federal laws for restaurants and venues that were also looking for that conformity, small venues that were shuttered. They got that conformity in the early package. And then, of course, the additional $150 million in small business COVID relief grants. So I just put it in perspective. This is the big number I think is important. For small businesses, you add up what we did in the early action with what we're proposing and what we did. It's $4 billion and $150 million. And then, of course, well, I've now gone backwards in the slides, resources that include the additional $500 million. You're getting close to $5 billion is the long-winded point in grants to small businesses when you add those three up. I also want to remind folks just of some other things we did in January that may come up and certainly have come up in the legislature. We are having an interesting conversation about UI, talk about debt, unemployment insurance debt. It's real, direct impacts to payroll taxes for small businesses. We need to start paying that debt down. You start repaying the federal government. That's why we put $3 billion in the January budget. We also want to get tourists back in the state, build off that $95 million from the prior year, doing another $45 million we're proposing this year, waiving filing fees across the spectrum of supports, other tax credits. You see these slides in January, you saw them. I just want to remind folks the work we're doing in working with the legislature to advance those principles. We're also looking to do something to advance our values, not just our principles. And that's reflected in this graph, $2.1 billion in new grants, tax credits, and some augmentations, some reforms of sorts on our existing well-established California Competes tax credit program, which sunsets in a year. We want to extend it for 5 years, but we want to extend it, and by the way, expand it to include CHIPS, to get more money from the CHIPS Act. That's $120 million. We can talk about that in the Q&A if you wish. But we are looking to do it in a way that's reflective of our values. You know, I just, so interesting. There was, I think, 1 or 2 companies that left California and now are trying to fly their employees back to California to get support for their, California values make us competitive globally. It's the reason our economy's outperformed every other economy in the Western hemisphere. 7.8% GDP growth, if you don't believe me, just last year. California, 7.8% GDP growth. The nation grew at 5.7%. Eat your heart out, Texas, 5.6%. California grew at 7.8% GDP growth. Interesting fact. Reflected, by the way, in these budget numbers, aren't they? So we want to be even more muscular. Let's grow. You want to relocate. You want to be where you value your employees, where your values that you express in your public documents are actually reflected in terms of the work we do as a state. We want to support you, and so we have $2.1 billion in relocation and opportunity credits that are reflected in this slide that we look forward to working with the legislature to fill in the blanks and some of the details and nuances that are still being worked out.